I'm Brett Walter, founder and CEO of Climate Action Now. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. While we are getting settled, I'd like to invite you to give us a shout out in the chat with your name, location, and affiliations if you'd like. I'd also like to invite you to turn on your cameras and share your bright, shiny faces with us. We do these parties as a Zoom meeting rather than as a webinar to facilitate interaction and underscore that we're all in this together. It takes a village, right? And thanks to the finagling of our friend Renee Carver, we have a 1,000 person Zoom meeting account, which is very cool. And thank you, Renee, if you're out there for that. I hope you're all safe and well this evening. The recent bizarre and extreme weather is a gut punch wake-up call that climate change is no longer a future abstraction. It's here now, and it's impacting more and more of us every day. My family recently relocated from the Bay Area to my home state of Oregon because the water shortages in California and the wildfire smoke and the power outages were making life increasingly difficult. And since we left, the major insurers have stopped writing new homeowner policies in the state of California. Our president, Tim Guinea, Tim, if you want to give a wave, had a big chunk of his driveway wash away in the recent flooding in the Hudson River Valley. So if you've experienced impacts or made major life changes because of climate change, please share them with everybody in the chat. We're here tonight to learn about and advocate for climate-friendly provisions in the 2023 U.S. Farm Bill. As our panel of experts will tell you in just a few minutes, the U.S. Farm Bill is a really big deal. It will determine emissions from one of the largest sectors of our economy for years to come. And your presence here tonight and your advocacy for those climate-friendly provisions is also a really big deal. Victory goes to the people who show up, and you have shown up, and your opinion matters. Public opinion, we like to say at Climate Action Now, is the only effective counterweight to the immense power of the fossil fuel industry. The industry understands this, which is why they spend so much time and money trying to shape our opinions with misinformation. So your opinion and the messages that you send tonight really do matter. Your opinion is your superpower, and the app is your megaphone. But your opinion doesn't count for much if you don't express it. So please join us tonight in sending messages. To help us get started with the app, I'll hand the spotlight to Matthew Vollrath, our Director of Content, to give you a little bit of instruction. Matthew?
Hey, everybody. I'm going to share my screen and put up a QR code on the screen here. That's the sort of weird looking square to the right. And that's how we're going to start taking actions tonight. So now is the time, if you haven't already, to take out your phone. Just hold it right up to your screen and take out your camera. Just point it at the QR code like you're about to take a picture, and then wait for a little yellow box to pop up that says Climate Action Now. Tap right on that box, and it should take you into the Climate Action Now app if you have it, and into the list of Farm Bill actions that we've prepared tonight. Marianne Krasny, one of our moderators, has done an incredible job with making all of these actions. So thank you so much, Marianne. If you don't yet have the app, it'll take you to the App Store to download it. But yeah, again, now is the time to scan this QR code and make sure you're in the app taking action so that we can get that goal tracker ticking up all the way to 2,000 actions tonight. So leave this up for a couple more seconds, and then when I take it down, my video will turn into this screen. So anybody who doesn't get a chance to scan it will get a chance to do it then, and we'll keep this goal tracker on the screen so we can see how we're doing, and hopefully get several thousand actions taken tonight.
Thank you, Matthew. And while Matthew was talking, I just pasted into the chat the Eventbrite link for our next action party, which is next week. The Farm Bill provision the Farm Bill has provisions to address food waste, but we'll be tackling those next week in our food waste action party with the NRDC and the Food Recovery Network. That will be Wednesday, July 19th at 7 p.m. There's the link. I hope you can join us. please feel free to dive in and start sending messages. You saw the goal there. Let's see how fast we can get to it. And finally, before I hand things over to our moderator and panel, I'd like to make some acknowledgements. First, to our co-sponsors, the Environmental Working Group, Earth Justice, National Resource Defense Council, and the Climate Rally Project. Thanks to these amazing organizations for helping make this event possible. Next, I'd like to thank the Climate Action Now team, which includes Matthew, who you just met, our one and only paid staffer, and our amazing team of volunteer action creators, and Tim Guinea, who you've also met, our volunteer president, who has spearheaded the series of environmental justice action parties. And special thanks to our moderator tonight, Dr. Marianne Krasny, director of the Civic Ecology Lab at Cornell University, and Climate Action Now's very own director of food policy. Marianne recruited our distinguished panel of experts tonight and created, with the assistance of our expert panel, most of the messages you'll be sending tonight. So with no more ado, Marianne, over to you.
Thank you, Brett. And welcome, everybody. I see 140 people, with more people coming on. And I just wanted to mention, Brett, you know the exact numbers. It was over 500 who signed up for this action party. The largest one that Climate Action Now has had. So it shows the importance of the Farm Bill and of all the wonderful volunteers who are on tonight and taking the actions. And Matthew, you probably saw that somebody had a question about being on their phone and doing the QR code at the same time. So I assume that you're getting back to them.
Thanks for letting me know. I'll be sure to check that out. Thanks.
Okay. And so we have a very distinguished panel tonight, 3 people, and I'm going to introduce them all at the beginning, and then each will get, or 2 of our panelists, I guess, will start with a short presentation, and then I'll be asking them questions, the panelists questions, and we'll have a back and forth. If you have questions, put them in the chat, and either Tim or I will interrupt anytime along the way our speakers to make sure that your questions are addressed. So our featured guests tonight, we have Scott Faber, who is the Senior Vice President of Government Affairs for the Environmental Working Group, a national environmental organization. He joined EWG, or the Environmental Working Group, in 2012, and has since led their campaigns related to farm, food, and chemical safety policies. From 2007 to 2012, Professor Faber was Vice President of Government Affairs for the Grocery Manufacturers Association, where he led their efforts to enact Food Safety Modernization Act. From 2000 to 2007, he was campaign manager for the Environmental Defense Fund, where he led efforts to reform farm policies. Professor Faber has frequently testified before Congress as an expert on farm, food, and chemical safety policies. And I heard a rumor that Scott also has been involved with the Farm Bill since the very first Farm Bill. When you talk, Scott, you can tell us if that's true. But I'm really, really pleased to have you tonight as an expert on the Farm Bill and food and agriculture policy. We also have Peter Lehner, who has a little bit of a voice loss issue tonight. So we're going to do our best to get Peter commenting as he can. Peter directs the Earth Justice's Sustainable Food and Farming Program, where he develops litigation, administrative, and legislative strategies to promote a more just and environmentally sound agricultural system and to reduce health, environmental, and climate harms from food production. He is a leading expert on the impact of agriculture on climate change and is the author of Farming for Our Future, the Science, Law, and Policy of Climate Neutral Agriculture. Peter has been honored with numerous awards by EPA and environmental groups. And I did read, Peter, your book, Farming for Our Future, and it's one of the few books, maybe the only one, that really addressed the labor issues of the ones I read that are related to the Farm Bill. And so I really appreciated you pointing out that most farmers, we talk about farmers, but most people involved in farming are not what we might call farmers, they're farm workers. And it's really important to remember them too, as we're thinking about all these issues. And finally, we have Allison Johnson, who's a senior attorney for Health, Food, People, and Communities program with the National Resources Defense Council. Allison focuses on sustainable food systems with a broad lens, recognizing that we need a massive shift toward diversified and health-promoting agriculture and away from harmful pesticides, soil degradation, and antibiotic use. She advocates for policy change at federal, state, and local levels, including stronger support for organic and climate-friendly agriculture. She also participates in administrative proceedings and litigations to strengthen protections for people and ecosystems threatened by dangerous agricultural practices. And Allison's written a recent report on organic agriculture and climate, which I used in creating some actions that we'll be looking at tonight. So with that, what I'd like to do is get started with Scott, who I think is going to share his screen and give us a short introduction to the Farm Bill.
Yep. No, I'm not going to share my screen. Unfortunately, you're going to have to look at me for just a couple of minutes. But I thought it would help just to explain what is the Farm Bill. I know everyone wonders, wow, the Farm Bill. You're probably not an expert on the Farm Bill, not something you talk about at the dinner table, but you should, because the Farm Bill, perhaps most importantly, is one of the few things Congress will actually do this year. Every 5 years, Congress has to reauthorize the Farm Bill, and it provides this particular Farm Bill will provide $1.4 trillion in spending over the next 10 years. That's a lot of money. And it has a huge impact, not just on what we eat and whether there are hungry people, but how food is grown and the extent to which we grow food in ways that helps address the climate crisis. And if you remember nothing else from this presentation, the Farm Bill is our best opportunity in this Congress to make progress in Congress on the climate crisis. So it's the one thing that Congress will definitely do, and there aren't too many things that fall into that category, that could, if done right, significantly help reduce greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture. Peter's going to talk a little bit more about what the main greenhouse gases are from agriculture. But just 2 more minutes on what is the Farm Bill. It probably shouldn't be called the Farm Bill because more than 80% of the funding that is provided by the Farm Bill is actually for Anti-Hunger Assistance Program, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, or what some of you might know as the food stamp program. More than 80% of the funding goes to help feed hungry people. And unfortunately, it's still not enough. We only provide people about $6 a day in a SNAP benefit, and you can only imagine how hard it is to feed yourself and your family on $6 per person per day. The rest of the Farm Bill, the other 20%, goes to farmers, and most of that flows in the form of various kinds of subsidies, in particular subsidies to major crops like cotton, peanuts, rice, corn, soybeans, and wheat. But part of that 20% of the Farm Bill that goes to farmers also goes to farmers to change how they farm to benefit the environment. And thanks to some of the investments that Peter's going to talk about, spending that goes to farmers who are offering to help take steps to address environmental challenges has increased dramatically to now $10 billion a year. So we've really, thanks to the funding in the Inflation Reduction Act that Peter will talk about, we are going to significantly increase the number of farmers who are being paid to take steps to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But it's not enough to spend that money. It's also really important to spend it wisely. And right now, we're not doing a very good job of that. Most of our conservation programs, an alphabet soup of programs that we promise we're not going to ask you to memorize, are not doing enough to make climate change a priority. And in some cases, are paying farmers to adopt practices that actually increase greenhouse gas emissions. So Farm Bill, huge opportunity. This is a really, really critical time to be talking to Congress. We are in the final hours of Congress writing this bill. The House and Senate will finish their drafts of the Farm Bill in the next few weeks. They will begin to have committee considerations of these bills in September and vote on them on the floors of the House and the Senate this fall. So this is a really, really, really important time to let Congress know that it's really important that we reward farmers when they take steps to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and that we don't cut any of the funding that Congress recently provided for the climate smart practices that Peter's going to talk about.
Hey, wait a minute. Before Peter talks, we've already broken our first goal. You guys have sent over 2,000 emails. So exactly as Scott was talking about, we need to reach out and let people know we're paying attention and we care, which is what you guys are doing. So let's make a new goal and let's knock it up to 3,000. I said we wouldn't be audacious, but let's be audacious and switch that out. Great work, everyone.
Yeah, and let
Thanks
me
all.
just jump in. I think some of you are probably, some of you may be experiencing the app getting kind of slow. Not to worry. We've asked our engineer to increase the number of servers that can handle the traffic. But if it's slow, just bear with it. It will eventually finish what it's doing and it will take you on to the next action. Thank you.
Okay, excuse my voice. I'm going to be brief. And some of the things that Scott said, I will talk about. I'm going to let Scott and Allison talk about. But let me quickly share my screen if this works. Is that showing the slide?
Yep.
Yeah, we can see the slide, Peter.
And I will go to slideshow. Is it that the slideshow? Oh, I should be seeing that.
You need to go to from beginning on the
Yeah.
all the way on the left.
There we go.
There you go.
Okay, so the reason we're taking a little detour into science is because most people who think about climate change think about fossil fuels. They think about burning coal and oil and power plants and in automobiles and trucks. And that, of course, drives a lot of our climate change. Agriculture's impact on climate change is very, very different from that. There is, of course, some amount of fossil fuel burning. Fertilizers and pesticide manufacturing is very fossil fuel intensive. There's actually a lot of energy used on farms and in irrigation and a tremendous amount in food distribution. So there is some carbon dioxide release from fossil fuel burning relating to agriculture. But most of the impact of agriculture on climate change comes from these other aspects: methane, nitrous oxide, and the soil itself. So methane, you might have heard of. It's often, it's basically known as natural gas. It's a very, very potent greenhouse gas, about 85 times stronger than carbon dioxide. What you may not know is that actually cows belching release more methane than the oil and gas industry in the United States. Their stomachs work differently than ours, so they release a tremendous amount of methane. And then all those animals, we have literally hundreds of millions and over a billion of animals that are produced and they produce a lot of waste. And that waste creates a lot of methane as well, often, especially when it sits in these big manure lagoons that are some of the things that Scott mentioned that are funded by the Farm Bill that aren't so great. And finally, rice paddies release a lot of methane. So agriculture is the largest source of methane in the country. The other big one is nitrous oxide. About 75% of nitrous oxide in the United States comes from agriculture. And that's because people put more fertilizer on the fields the plants can take up. And that excess fertilizer, some of it runs off. You've heard of the dead zones in the Gulf of Mexico or harmful algae blooms in lakes or groundwater contamination. That's often caused by this fertilizer runoff. But much of it also converts into nitrous oxide, this potent greenhouse gas, and accelerates climate change. And then lastly, what is harder to measure is the soil itself. Healthy soil, when it's grassland or forest land, has a tremendous amount of carbon in it. But when you convert that into agriculture, you lose a tremendous amount of carbon. The carbon in the soil opens up when it's tilled, meets with the oxygen in the air, and is released as carbon dioxide. And we're still converting a tremendous amount of land in this country, losing carbon. And moreover, once the land is converted, it's no longer storing and sequestering carbon like a natural forest does. So all of these together add up to far more, a bigger contribution to climate change than most realize. About a third of our climate change comes from agriculture. And that's why, as Scott said, the Farm Bill is so important, because it's the Farm Bill, more than the classic environmental laws, the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act, that govern what happens to all of this pollution on farms. So let me just show you two other quick things. One is when we think about farming, the reason it has such an impact is because it uses most of our land. Most other activities, even fossil fuels, it may look very ugly to see a mine or an oil well, but it doesn't take much land. Agriculture uses a tremendous amount of land particularly for cow pasture and for growing feed for all those animals. And all of that use of land has a big climate impact. And that's, again, what the Farm Bill can affect and why it's so important that you tell Congress to say, use this Farm Bill power to think about that. Affect all that land that you're seeing on the screen is going to be affected by what the Farm Bill encourages farmers to do. And one of the things you'll often hear is, oh, it's hard to change, or if we change, we're going to, all starve. We're not going to have enough food. The great thing is that there are a lot of practices that have been proven to allow us to produce a lot of healthy food in a sustainable way. And we won't go into these in great detail, but what's great is that farmers around the country have done this on their own. And they have shown that these practices work. They work on different crops. They work in different regions. They work on different scales. But our challenge is that right now they're only employed on maybe 2 or 4% of most US agriculture. So the issue isn't to invent something new. The issue is to accelerate adoption of these practices, which may be using crops that last from year to year, perennial crops, which you can see in this slide have much bigger roots and will be able to withstand droughts and floods much better. Rotating your crops, adding trees to cropland and pasture land, changing how you graze the cows, how you deal with that manure I mentioned, how you deal with fertilizer. All of this can make a big difference, and all of this can be affected by the Farm Bill. And then I'm just going to throw out one little thing, which really isn't so much the Farm Bill, but a little bit. But many people often wonder, okay, I'm taking action. What can I do myself? Well, one of the biggest things we can all do is think about our diet, because not only how food is grown, but what food is grown makes a big, big difference. And as you see, different foods have a very, very different carbon footprint. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and I think turn it back to Marianne.
Yes, thank you, Peter. So there's a question that you were going to address, Peter, but we can turn it to Scott if you prefer. And it's also, there's another related question. So it's more broadly about the Farm Bill. And the question has to do with that the IRA funding for farm conservation might be in danger. And wondering if either Peter or Scott can comment on that and perhaps give a little background on conservation programs in the Farm Bill and in the IRA. And then from the audience, we have just a general question that I think is real quick for one of you to answer. And that is, assuming that the Farm Bill is not passed by whatever it is, October 1, when it runs out, how will that impact things? In other words, will it just run on a continuing resolution or something like that? Thank you.
No, great questions. And so as you've all learned now, the Inflation Reduction Act included 19.5, almost $20 billion specifically for climate smart practices, as Peter described, that farmers can adopt that can reduce the nitrous oxide emissions from fertilizer, and that can reduce the methane emissions from animals and their waste, and that can help build soil carbon. And that was the biggest investment in private lands conservation since the Dust Bowl, a huge achievement. And so perhaps not surprisingly, some members of Congress are now proposing to cut that funding in order to increase particular farm subsidies that overwhelmingly benefit the farmers who grow peanuts, rice, and cotton. And that's a real threat, because the Farm Bill is a zero-sum game. You can't increase funding for one thing without cutting funding for something else. And the only places of the Farm Bill that you can cut are SNAP, farm subsidies, and conservation payments like the climate smart payments that were included in the Inflation Reduction Act. So again, not surprisingly, unfortunately, some members of Congress, both Republicans and Democrats, have begun to say, gosh, we really ought to increase these subsidies that primarily benefit cotton, rice, and peanut growers, and we ought to cut the climate smart funding in the Inflation Reduction Act to do so. Here are 3 reasons why that's a bad idea. First of all, if we don't reward farmers who are taking steps to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, agriculture's share of US greenhouse gas emissions will go from at least 11% to more than 30% by 2050. And so let me say that again, if we don't make these investments, if we don't help share the cost of practices that farmers can adopt to reduce methane emissions and nitrous oxide emissions, agriculture's share of US greenhouse gas emissions will increase from about 11% or more to more than 30% by 2050. And that's not because agriculture's emissions are going up, although they're certainly going up a little bit. It's because every other sector of the economy, especially the energy generation and transportation sectors, are reducing their emissions so dramatically. So ag's share of that pie, if you can imagine the pie chart, is just going to grow bigger and bigger and bigger unless we make these investments. The second reason is that the vast majority of farmers do not grow peanuts, rice, and cotton. The vast majority of farmers do not grow the crops that would primarily benefit from cutting climate smart IRA funding to increase these particular farm subsidies. So it would not help most farmers. And so while you certainly hear members of Congress and farm groups and even some of your friends say, well, it's really tough to be a farmer, we ought to do more to help farmers manage the unique risks that farmers face, especially the risks related to commodity markets and extreme weather. Keep in mind that the subsidy increases that are being proposed do not help the vast majority of farmers. And the third reason is that even those farmers who are eligible for these subsidies, there are certain kind of price guarantee that's written into one part of the Farm Bill. Even those farmers who are eligible get, the vast majority of those farmers, that tiny subset farmers, get a few $1,000s. And that's because those payments are tied to how much you grow. And that means the top 10%, the biggest 10% of those subsidy recipients get 80% of the money. So it's so bad for our efforts to address the climate, but also doesn't do very much to help most farmers if we transfer money from the climate smart IRA funding to increase these particular subsidies, these price guarantees that have been included in every farm bill going back to the 1930s, when I first started working on the Farm Bill.
Okay, thank you. And did you get a chance? Sorry, I'm trying to do the chat.
Yes.
What would be the implications about, it not being passed in time?
Great question. So the good news, and when you call Congress or when you join a lobby day with NRDC or Earth Justice or Climate Reality Project or Sierra Club, one of the most important things to say is don't cut IRA, don't cut the climate smart funding in the IRA. The second thing to say is we don't have to pass a bad farm bill. And that's because even though the Farm Bill expires on September 30th, the current Farm Bill expires on September 30th, there have been some changes in the law recently that allow most of the big programs to continue, regardless of whether or not Congress passes a Farm Bill. SNAP continues, regardless of whether Congress passes a Farm Bill. Crop insurance, which is now the biggest part of the farm safety net, continues, regardless of whether we pass a Farm Bill. All the conservation programs, because of what was done in the Inflation Reduction Act, continue regardless of whether there's a Farm Bill. So one of the things we're doing, and I've been doing literally all day today, is reminding members of Congress, you do not have to pass the bad Farm Bill. If you share our values, if you want a Farm Bill that feeds hungry people, that addresses the climate crisis, that protects farm workers, that addresses historic discrimination, that provides a farm safety net that helps farmers who need the help, you can say no. You have a lot of leverage. It's the other side that really needs a Farm Bill much more than folks who care about the climate too.
All right. Well, thank you. Thanks, Scott. We had a question that leads us right into our next panelist, which is Allison. And Allison will be addressing the issue of organic agriculture and how it relates to greenhouse gas emissions from farms. But there's a related question, Allison, that asks, is there any distinguishing within the Farm Bill between conventional factory farming and smaller organic chemical-free farms?
Thanks, Marianne. I guess the short answer is yes. And I'll zoom out to begin with and say, I think a lot of times people living in urban or suburban areas hear Farm Bill and they picture something far away that doesn't really affect them. But organic food is one example of how the Farm Bill actually connects to our everyday lives. The really strict federal law that governs how organic food is produced was passed as part of the 1990 Farm Bill. And the Farm Bill could and should be used to shift our whole food system toward organic practices. We know a lot of people look for the little green and brown circle with the word organic in it because they're worried about the health impacts of consuming pesticide residues. But as Peter previewed, there are actually really strong climate arguments for supporting organic as well. So first, there are no synthetic fertilizers used in organic agriculture and very few synthetic pesticides. That synthetic input production is extremely energy intensive, so these inputs are a significant source of CO2. And use of synthetic fertilizers and some pesticides is also a significant source of nitrous oxide emissions. Synthetic nitrogen fertilizer alone is responsible for 2.4% of global greenhouse gases. So by prohibiting most synthetic inputs, organic agriculture avoids these emissions as well as reducing human and ecosystem health harms. Second, organic animal agriculture is less climate intensive. Organic animals have to be fed organic diets. So production of conventional animal feed is heavily dependent on those synthetic inputs. And the organic feed requirement is an important way to drive down those input emissions. In addition, manure from industrial animal agriculture is often stored in big lagoons and sprayed across the land, and that accounts for about 12% of agricultural greenhouse gases. And in contrast, organic animals are required to spend more time on pasture, and they have very strict rules for careful, safe manure management. So shifting organic production in the animal agriculture section reduces the methane emissions associated with manure storage. Third, organic producers are required to use cover crops, crop rotation, and compost to build soil. And as Peter noted, research has shown that these practices together actually maximizes the potential for soil carbon sequestration and offers a lot of other health and ecosystem benefits. And then finally, organic farms are more resilient in a changing climate. They typically incorporate a wider range of crops and store more water in the soil, so they're better positioned to survive and keep yields up through droughts, floods, and all this other extreme weather that's becoming more and more common. So organic is a big win for climate in addition to health. And our goal is to bring more land under organic management and make sure that organic food is affordable and accessible to everyone. But one of the major challenges in reaching that goal is that there isn't enough federal funding to support organic. So to the question, there's a lot of money in the Farm Bill for most types of agriculture. There's a little bit of funding for organic. Even though organic funding has increased in every Farm Bill since the federal organic law was adopted in 1990, we're still spending very little on organic relative to the rest of agriculture. We actually just completed an analysis of the 2018 Farm Bill support for organic. This is the link that Marianne put in the chat, thank you. And we found that it only directed 0.1% of the whole $428 billion bill to organic. It's peanuts, not the types of peanuts that we're trying to promote. And so we're looking to ensure that organic gets a fairer slice of the investments this time around. One of our top priorities for this Farm Bill is a marker bill called the Opportunities in Organic Act. The bill will provide flexible funding to help more producers transition to organic and be successful in the long term. So there's a 3-year transition period from when you last use a prohibited pesticide or fertilizer to when you can actually sell products from the farm as organic. And that period is challenging and risky for farmers, and we don't have a lot of options to help them ride out that challenging time. The Opportunities in Organic Act will support producers through that transition period, as well as expand reimbursements to cover a portion of certification costs and help them access relevant technical assistance. That bill has been introduced by Senator Welch and by Representatives Panetta and Adams. I saw a few Panetta District folks on the call, so give him a thanks. And we're currently building support to have it incorporated into the Farm Bill. So this is an area where consumers can play a particularly influential role in the Farm Bill. Members of Congress are literally tallying up how many times they hear about issues from their constituents. And urban representatives are much less likely to be hearing from people like you who care about climate on Farm Bill issues specifically. So one call or email from a real person can get an issue on their radar when they might otherwise pass it over. So I really encourage you to take action tonight in support of the Opportunities in Organic Act. And I'll just mention briefly as well that my colleagues at NRDC are working on the Cover Act, which would provide a crop insurance incentive for the beneficial practice of cover cropping on farms, and a number of food waste issues that I think are going to be coming up in the next action party. So I'm happy to try to answer questions on those topics. And there are really a lot of pieces that need to come together in this Farm Bill to move us toward that full system shift.
But wait, before we do that, we have to mention we blew through yet another goal. So while Allison was talking about sending one email, you guys have sent over 3,000, which is unbelievable. So let's knock the goal tracker up to 3,500 and let's keep going.
Okay, well, thanks everybody for all those actions, and thanks, Allison. There are a couple of questions related to organic ag. And they have to do with land use and productivity. And there's a similar question, I think, related to regenerative agriculture. So, you know, if people come back against these practices with saying, well, they're not as productive as traditional agriculture, so we're going to have to clear more land, which has carbon emissions. Allison, what is your response?
It's a good question, and it's an observation or a speculation that I hear a lot. I think there are two main points to raise in response. One is there are a lot of ways that we can farm organically. Often you are able to integrate more crops and products on one organic farm, so the productivity per acre can actually be much higher as you're layering these different elements of a farm together. So it's not necessarily a one-to-one that we're looking at when we're comparing yields and acreage. And second, actually, now that I say two, there are three, so I'll come back around. Second is that going back to that funding for organic in the Farm Bill, we've invested billions of dollars in public money to research support for conventional agriculture. We've worked on seed development, we've worked on tools, we've worked on equipment. If we were putting anywhere near that type of money toward best practices in organic, developing regionally relevant seeds and breeds, providing farmers with more capacity and expertise to build on what they're testing on a farm, I think you'd see those numbers looking really different. And then the third point is just to reiterate what I said about resilience. We're looking backwards in comparing what little research there is on organic to the research that there is on conventional. Looking forward, we're looking at extreme weather events, we're looking at droughts, we're looking at floods. And there's this 40-year trial at the Rodale Institute that has compared different farming systems, and they've found under extreme weather conditions that organic fares much better as far as yields. So it's the way that we need to go in the long term to preserve our biodiversity, to protect our health, and to keep up the stability of our food system.
Okay, great. I'm going to move right along to the next question, which is for Scott, and it has to do with methane emissions, meat, farming for meat production, and how that's addressed in the Farm Bill. And there are a couple of related questions, Scott, from the audience. So one, is there a chance of using the Farm Bill to promote plant-based eating? And then there's another about how impactful would it be if we were to move CAFOs from conservation programs?
Yeah,
So.
Great questions. Just as Allison was saying, we have massively invested in producing animal protein in this country, which is why we are one of the world leaders in producing animal protein. We've provided, just to the folks raising the animals, more than $50 billion since 1995. $50 billion. That doesn't include the hundreds of billions of dollars that we've given to farmers to grow the animal feed that we then turn and feed to the animals or export to other countries where they feed it to their animals. And so we have massively invested in an animal protein system that has had devastating impacts, first and foremost, on the animals, but also had devastating impacts on the communities where these large operations are located. And of course, they have also produced a lot of methane from the animals and their waste. So we've done everything we could ever possibly imagine to support conventional animal protein production. And that's why now is the time to really invest in the solutions that help reduce those emissions. Some of those things might be changing how we manage manure. And Peter can say more about that. He's a deep expert on that issue. So there are ways that we can manage manure that reduce the amount of methane that comes out of the manure. There are promising ways to change what we feed animals, including feed additives that could help reduce the amount of methane that comes out of both ends of the animals. So but right now, virtually none, zero, practically no dollars is going to farmers who are trying to change how they manage animal waste or what they feed their animals. The climate smart funding in the IRA could really change that if we make good use of that. And that is why it is so important for you to tell Congress right now to make reducing methane emissions in the Farm Bill a big priority. We also need to do a lot more, and I'm so grateful somebody asked about plant-based options. We need to do a lot more to scale up plant-based alternatives in the Farm Bill. As I said, we spent more than $50 billion since 1995 on animal protein producers. We've spent $30 million in that same period to support folks who are trying to produce plant-based foods, the farmers who produce the ingredients, the companies who turn those foods into the things we love. And it's incredibly important, and Peter alluded to this in that last slide, that all of us, even people like me who eat meat, occasionally, just once in a while, change our diets to replace an animal protein with a plant protein. And there are lots of things we can do in this Farm Bill to help people like me, people who aren't going to become a vegan or vegetarian. Trust me, a lot of my friends have tried, so that it makes it easier for me to occasionally choose a plant-based option. Some of that is providing more support for the farmers who produce the ingredients, the pulse crops, lentils, chickpeas, and so on. Part of it is providing more support to the companies like Oatly and others who turn those ingredients into the foods we love. And the best reason to do all that is not because it's great for the climate or because it's great for our health or even because it's great for the animals. It's because it's great for our farmers. The global demand for plant-based alternatives is growing dramatically, especially among younger consumers. Right now, we are #1 in the world. We are the world's leader when it comes to producing plant-based foods. And that could be a huge opportunity for our farmers and the rural workers who turn those ingredients into the foods that people all over the world should be eating. So really exciting to see members of Congress starting to look for ways to scale up plant-based in the Farm Bill for the first time, really for the first time.
Thank you, Scott. And just a follow-up question, more generally related to the Farm Bill. The question is specifically, is the Vice President involved at all in the Farm Bill legislation? But maybe if she's not, you can point out who are the executive branch officials that are more involved or.
Well, I'd love to bring Peter and Allison into this, but I have to say I've been really encouraged by Secretary Vilsack's leadership. I know a lot of folks were skeptical about Secretary Vilsack when he returned for a second time as the Secretary of Agriculture, but he has made climate a central focus of his second administration, his second time as Secretary of Agriculture. He's invested $3 billion in a program to help better understand the climate benefits of different practices, something called the Climate Smart Commodities Program. He has also recognized that farmers can make more money potentially by being able to say that the things I'm growing are climate smart because you consumers are looking for foods that have been produced in a way that are consistent with your values. One thing he hasn't done, but we've been talking to him about, is crack down on the greenwashing, the bogus climate claims like climate friendly, low carbon, net zero, that are completely unverified and frankly downright fake. So we really need, maybe that's another action party. We really need your help putting pressure on Secretary Vilsack to say no to bogus climate claims so that when you're making a good decision in the grocery store, you're actually making a difference.
I just want to quickly add that the Farm Bill really talks about the production side. And if you think about our energy system, we've been transforming our energy system, both by trying to clean up power plants, move to clean energy systems like wind and solar, and also using less energy with LED light bulbs and efficient refrigerators and cars and everything. And in a sense, one of the things we can do is clean up how we produce the food. We can also change the food that we eat, which is what Scott is talking about. And it's really important to remember that has worked and been critical in the energy transformation. We shouldn't be afraid of that in this transformation. And the food procurement side is not so much focused on the Farm Bill, although there's some elements of there in the SNAP program, but that's more through alternatives like how the federal government, the state government, your local governments spend their food budgets.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks, Peter. We're going to come back to you at the end, but since you mentioned the SNAP program, which is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, those of you who are a little older might remember it as food stamps. That's what it used to be called. And I hear it's projected to be around 80% of the total Farm Bill budget. This question's for Allison, which the budget itself.
Hold on, I'm interrupting you, Marianne, because we.
Oh, no, not again, Tim.
I'm sorry, but we made our goal again, and I wasn't paying attention, and we blew through it. Let's go to 3,800.
Okay, thanks, Tim. Keep going, everybody. We have about a little less. We have 14 minutes left. So, and we have 2 more topics. So, Allison, what are the opportunities in the SNAP provisions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions?
Thanks, Marianne. And wow, I just have to say you all are very impressive. I can't believe how much action everyone is taking tonight. So as you said, SNAP is the biggest spend in the Farm Bill, and it's a critical program that helps over 42 million low-income people in the United States afford food. A really significant percentage of those people are families with children, seniors, and family members who are disabled. So it's an essential tool for making sure that people across the country have enough to eat. And the program needs our strong support to continue delivering that food to people who urgently need it. Even with SNAP dollars, families are making really hard decisions about what to eat every day. Food prices have been rising, and the Farm Bill strongly influences what foods are affordable and what feels out of reach. I like to say who eats what, when, and where. And unfortunately, foods that are healthy for both people and the environment, like organic fruits and vegetables, haven't received the same level of subsidies as commodities like animal feed. But there are incentive programs that make these foods more affordable for SNAP participants. So the Gus Schumacher Nutrition Incentive Program, GUSNIP, increases the value of SNAP dollars when they're used in specific ways, like spending on produce at the farmer's market or through produce prescriptions from doctors. So this is a win-win for health and climate because it helps SNAP participants stretch their dollars further, and it supports the smaller scale sustainable producers who tend to sell through farmers markets. And my colleagues at NRDC have done research in New York on how and where people use SNAP, and have found that SNAP participants really want to buy more produce, and these incentive programs are essential for helping them do that. GUSNIP was created in the 2014 Farm Bill with strong bipartisan support. It's kind of a different world back then, but it really should be expanded in this Farm Bill along with continued strong funding for SNAP. So I hope you'll add SNAP and GUSNIP in particular to the actions that you take tonight and in the coming months. It's really going to need our defense and our offense.
Okay, thank you, Allison. And I see a few people in the chat are having problems figuring out how to send these messages. So you can message Matthew Volrath, or Matthew, maybe you can take a look at the chat. There's Susan Levin, who's having some problems, a few other people. Maybe you can help them out, Matthew. Thank you. And then, so Peter, are you up for talking about perennial agriculture? And I do have a related question if you are.
Sure, I'll be very brief because my voice is terrible. But the point is, perennial agriculture, as you saw in that picture, is agriculture that lasts from year to year. So it has much bigger roots, and it can better withstand floods and droughts, store a lot more carbon. But most of the Farm Bill programs assume that you invest some money now and you pay it back, or it assumes an annual crop. Like corn and soy and wheat and rice. And so it's not a good fit for perennial agriculture. So part of the programs, the letters that we are urging you to send to Congress, which would be great, is to make sure the Farm Bill supports perennial agriculture as well. Just as Scott was saying, hey, the Farm Bill should not only support this meat, which it's done for so long, but support plant-based alternatives. This Farm Bill shouldn't just support annual crops, but it should also support perennial crops. And they have been woefully underinvested, woefully under-researched, and they're harder. If you're a farmer, you're investing in a perennial crop, you have to plant it, and it may be 3 years before you start getting your crop back, your money back, because it takes time for your peach tree or your nut tree or whatever to start growing. It, in the end, can be extremely resilient to climate change. It can be extremely productive. Most perennial crops tend to produce healthier food, but it's not a good fit. So you have to tell Congress, pay attention to this great opportunity of perennial agriculture and get the Farm Bill to support perennial agriculture, as well as organic that Allison talked about, as well as plant-based that Scott talked about.
Wait a minute, we did it again. So we did it. You guys did it. You guys who joined us tonight, we've gone past 3,800. Let's round it off to a solid 4,000 messages to the government telling them to take climate action through the Farm Bill. So let's crank that up. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. And we just have, I think, time for one more question. So I'll throw it open. And this is, where in the Farm Bill is there protection for pollinators and forage strips and fields for pollinators? Does anybody want to comment on this issue about pollinators?
No, it's a great question. Lots of ways that we can pay farmers to produce pollinator habitat. There's an alphabet soup of conservation programs, EQIP, CSP, CRP, that all in different ways can pay farmers to create pollinator habitat on their farms. Right now, as I said at the top, 2 out of 3 farmers were being turned away by USDA when they offered to create pollinator habitat. The Climate Smart funding and the Inflation Reduction Act has significantly reduced the number of farmers who can take those steps. And of course, things that create pollinator habitat for long periods of time also help build soil carbon and are not going to be fertilized in ways that increase nitrous oxide emissions. So it's not just a win for the bees, it's a win for the climate. But Congress needs to hear from you right now that we must not cut the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA Climate Smart funding, or we'll go back to that terrible time when 2 out of 3 farmers were being turned away. And in particular, we absolutely shouldn't be cutting climate smart funding in the Inflation Reduction Act to increase subsidies for a handful of extremely well-off cotton, peanut, and rice farmers. That just makes no sense at all. At a time when agriculture is 11% of greenhouse gas emissions, but is growing to be more than 30% of greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, we have to be doing everything we can to reward farmers who are reducing nitrous oxide emissions, reducing methane emissions, creating pollinator habitat. Because if we don't, it'll not just be a catastrophe for the planet and for the bees, it'll be a political catastrophe for our farmers. No one wants to be number one when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions, but that's the path we're on if we cut the climate smart funding in this next Farm Bill. So let Congress know. Allison said it, your voice really matters. It really does. The emails, the phone calls, the visits, intercepting them at the supermarket, any way that you can reach a member of Congress to say, don't cut the climate smart funding in the IRA is really, really, really important right now, because we're in the final hours of writing this Farm Bill. This Farm Bill will be written in the next few months. Congress is making big decisions right now about whether or not to cut these funds and whether or not to make sure they really actually reduce these emissions that are so critical to reduce.
And I'll just add, half of our farms don't break even every year. We are losing our farms and they're not making money. So we're asking a lot of them to take on our climate burdens on top of that. And the conservation programs that are funded through this IRA money are one of the key ways that we can recognize publicly the contributions that farmers make and incentivize them and really make it pencil for them to do the best thing. So just to reinforce what Scott said, that we need this money to keep our farms alive. our small farms especially, and to pay them for the hard work that they do every day to put food on our tables.
I'll just add one footnote to that, which is every farmer is eligible for these conservation programs. Every farmer, regardless of what they grow, ranchers, farmers, tree farmers, whatever they grow, they're eligible for this alphabet soup of conservation programs. Only about 30% of farmers are eligible for subsidies for covered commodities. And then a much smaller fraction of those farmers grow the peanuts, cotton, and rice that would benefit from cuts to the IRA to increase subsidies. So I'm going to throw in the chat some analysis we did that shows if we do what some Republicans and some Democrats want to do, if we cut climate smart funding for the IRA to increase these subsidies tied to what are called price guarantees, farmers in 38 states will get less money. Farmers in 38 states will get less money, and it's in particular money to help address the climate crisis. So now's a really important time to tell Congress, especially if you live in a state like California, New York, Florida, Washington State, anywhere in the Northeast. My farmers don't grow the peanuts, rice, and cotton. They grow everything else, but they don't grow peanuts, rice, and cotton. They are ready and anxious and eager to take steps to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We shouldn't be turning them away to send that money to states like Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and so on, where farmers are doing fine by any measure.
Hey, you guys just did it again. We blew past the 4,000 goal. So I'm not even going to set a new one because we're right near the end. But one thing just to know is that these actions stay on the app. And even after we finish this session, you can keep taking them. So let's keep going.
It'll be a lot faster if you do it tomorrow or sometime when hundreds of people aren't trying to do it at once. So come back tomorrow, come back the next day, do it while you're making your coffee, whatever is best for you, but keep taking action after this.
Yeah, and let me add, there is no law that says you can only take an action once. In fact, the app will let you do it multiple times. And I think it's pretty well known that especially busy legislators, they're not reading our deathless prose, right? They have staffers that are keeping tallies of constituent concerns. And they give the tallies, the summaries to the legislator. So it really is a numbers game. It's quantity is what matters. So we've relaxed some rules in the app. I mean, you can come back the next day and send messages again and raise the volume. Thank you.
So Brett, I know we have to wrap up and you're going to announce the food waste action party for next week, but there were a bunch of people who had technical issues. Is there somebody that they can email if they just weren't able to get on their phones to send messages?
I can also stay on if anybody's able to stay on for a couple minutes after and try to help people.
Yeah, if you want to stay on afterwards, work with Matt. As far as emailing for support, you're looking at him, send an email to support@climateactionnow.com. And I'll get back to you as soon as I can. In terms of other things, I haven't put this out here before, but I want to do it now because we have so many folks. If you belong to an organization that would like to do your own action party, email me. You could email me at support@climateactionnow, and we can potentially help you with that. Give you use of our platform with technical assistance for free. So that's why we're here, is to scale up citizen advocacy, and helping other organizations do their own action parties is something we've already done it now for Physicians for Social Responsibility and for Beyond Plastics. And so we're very open to using our limited resources to help you all with that. I'm gonna right now really encourage you to join us next week when we dive into the food waste issues that get somewhat addressed in the Farm Bill. So that's in the chat. I hope you can join us on July 19th. Is it July 19th? And with speakers from NRDC and the Food Recovery Network, is a really, really interesting organization. It's doing terrific work. Let me see what else I've got for you.
That really is going to be part 2 of the Farm Bill Action Party. So much of the food waste action is going to be in the Farm Bill. So if you're here for the Farm Bill, you should definitely come next week for the food waste as well.
And I'd like to welcome John Northrup, who just joined the meeting. I'm sorry you're a little late, but we're glad you're here anyhow.
Hi, John. Thanks for joining us. Well, we're thank you, everybody, and thank you. What about our panel? How about thumbs up and applause? What a terrific panel, very informative. I'm going to go back and watch it again. And oh, by the way, folks, I will, in another couple of hours, I will send a recording link to everybody who registered, which includes all of you. And the QR code that you're looking at right now, it will be in that email to help you get back, into the app, to keep taking Farm Bill actions. Please keep at it. I mean, this is it. I mean, this is the big deal. This is the big kahuna here for us at the federal level. It's going to have a massive impact. And as you heard our speakers say, your voice, your opinion really does carry weight with our elected officials. And so anyway, thank you all for being here. I'm going to, well, we'll leave it open, as I say, for anybody who wants to hang around to ask some questions of Matthew. I'm going to jump into a meeting with the panelists for a final debriefing. But again, thank you so much, everybody, for being with us today. And